At 2:19 a.m. on a moonless Saturday in Abu Dhabi's exclusive Al Bateen district, emergency responders received a call that would unravel the carefully constructed facade of one of the Emirates' most powerful families. The dispatcher's voice was steady, professional, but the urgency in her tone unmistakable. Female, mid-30s, unresponsive, possible overdose. She relayed to the ambulance racing through empty streets where properties routinely sold for 9 figures. This wasn't just another medical emergency. This was the beginning of a story that would expose how wealth and power can turn human lives into disposable assets in a ledger of ambition. Security footage from Zayed Medical Center would later show an unmarked private ambulance arriving at the emergency entrance. The woman on the stretcher was barely clinging to life, oxygen mask obscuring her face, for already running, vital signs flickering dangerously on the portable monitor. The EMTs moved with practiced efficiency, but something about their demeanor caught the attention of Dr. Mariam Al-Hozani, the attending physician that night. They seemed nervous, evasive when questioned about the patient's history. "Who is she?" Dr. Al-Hozani demanded, noting the lack of identification or medical records accompanying the critical patient. "Employee from the Kazim estate," one EMT replied, avoiding eye contact. "That's all we know." The only personal item accompanying the dying woman was a jade bracelet with the initials LC, engraved in delicate script. It would become the first piece of evidence in what would grow into one of the most shocking criminal investigations in recent UAE history. By sunrise, Detective Aziza Nasser had been summoned to the hospital. At 42, Nasser had built her reputation investigating crimes involving foreign workers in elite households, cases that powerful people preferred to keep quiet. 15 years with special victims had taught her to read the silent language of power imbalance. Standing in the ICU, watching machines breathe for the unidentified woman, Nasser already sensed the familiar patterns of wealth, privilege, and disposable lives. "Toxicology shows a lethal cocktail of sedatives," Dr. Al-Hozani explained, handing over preliminary reports. "And those bruises aren't consistent with self-administration. Someone did this to her." What neither woman knew then was that the jade bracelet would lead them into a labyrinth of secrets that would implicate one of Abu Dhabi's most respected business dynasties, and expose a system that treated foreign workers as commodities rather than human beings. This is the story of Lorena Cabral and the price she paid for daring to disrupt the plans of those who believed their wealth made them untouchable. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome to Trace True Crimes, where we uncover the darkest truths behind headlines. Hit that subscribe button because you won't want to miss our daily deep dives into cases that expose the shadows lurking behind privilege and power. Lorena Cabral was born in Cebu City, Philippines, where the air hangs heavy with humidity and possibility. The eldest of 5 children, she grew up in a 2-room apartment where her father, Eduardo, worked double shifts as a security guard to keep his children in school. Neighbors still remember Lorena as the serious girl who would study by candlelight during the frequent power outages that plagued their neighborhood. When she was 12, Eduardo collapsed during his shift at a luxury hotel. The heart attack that took his life left the family without their primary provider. Imelda Cabral, suddenly widowed at 34, took over her husband's determination to see their children educated. She began working cleaning shifts at the same hotel where Eduardo had died, often sleeping only 4 hours between jobs. Former co-workers describe how she would collect discarded hotel soap and shampoo to bring home, saving every peso for her children's futures. Imelda would arrive with blisters on her feet from walking to save bus fare, recalls Marissa Domingo, who worked alongside her for 8 years. But she never complained. She would say, "My Lorena is going to be a nurse. She's going to heal people, not clean up after them." Lorena's academic excellence earned her a partial scholarship to Cebu Normal University's nursing program, but it wasn't enough. University records show she maintained a perfect GPA while working evenings at a call center and weekends at a local clinic. Classmates remember her falling asleep during lectures, exhaustion etched on her face, but her exam scores never dropped below the top percentile. There was something different about Lorena. Dr. Rosario Santos, her former professor, would later tell investigators, "Most students were studying to escape poverty. Lorena was studying because she truly believed healthcare was a right everyone deserved, regardless of their wealth. Graduation photos show Lorena, 22, thin but radiant in her white uniform, flanked by her proud mother and siblings. What the photos don't show is the reality waiting beyond the ceremony. A healthcare system where new nurses earned barely enough to support themselves, let alone help their families. For 3 years, Lorena worked at Cebu Provincial Hospital, where resources were so scarce that nurses routinely purchased their own gloves and basic supplies. Security footage from those years shows her staying hours after shifts ended, caring for patients in overcrowded wards where 3 people often shared a single bed. Meanwhile, she sent home 2/3 of her salary to support her siblings' education, living in a dormitory with 5 other nurses to minimize expenses. The contrast between Lorena's reality and the healthcare systems of wealthy countries became increasingly apparent as she watched colleagues leave for positions abroad. Each departure represented both loss and possibility. Nurses with similar skills earning 20 times her salary in places where sterile gloves weren't considered a luxury. When Pinnacle International Healthcare staffing contacted Lorena in early 2023, the offer seemed like divine intervention. Private nurse to Kadir Kazim, the 79-year-old patriarch of a business empire spanning 3 continents. The salary, 15 times what she earned in Cebu, would allow her siblings to complete their education without struggle. Her mother could finally retire from the cleaning job that had bent her spine and aged her beyond her years. Marina Cruz, Lorena's closest friend from nursing school, was the last person to see her before she left for Abu Dhabi. She was so excited but terrified too, Marina told investigators. She kept saying, "This is too good to be true. Nothing this good happens without a cost." Those words would prove prophetic in ways neither woman could have imagined. The family gathering before Lorena's departure transformed their small apartment into a celebration. Her brother Paolo had created a hand-drawn world map showing the distance between Cebu and Abu Dhabi. Her sisters prepared her favorite cassava cake, a luxury they could rarely afford. Photographs from that evening show laughter, tears, and the unmistakable mixture of pride and anxiety that accompanies life-changing transitions. It was Imelda who gave Lorena the jade bracelet that would later become her only identification on a hospital gurney. "This was your grandmother's," she said, clasping it around her daughter's wrist. "She wore it when she left her village to find work in the city. Now it will protect you even farther from home." Then she added words that would haunt the investigation. "Sometimes love means traveling very far to help those you care about." When Lorena stepped off the plane in Abu Dhabi on March 10, 2023, the desert heat hit her like a physical force. Airport security footage captures her first moments in the Emirates. A petite woman in a modest black dress, single suitcase in hand, eyes wide as she scanned the arrivals terminal for her contact. What the footage doesn't show is her racing heart or the prayer she whispered to herself, "Please let me be strong enough for whatever comes next." The driver waiting for her, Mahmoud, according to employment records, wore the traditional kandura and spoke minimal English. The drive from the airport to the Kazim estate provided Lorena's first glimpse of Abu Dhabi's impossible wealth. Glass skyscrapers rose from the desert like mirages. Luxury cars gleamed in the punishing sun. Everything sparkled with the sheen of money and power that made her monthly salary, life-changing by Philippine standards, seem suddenly insignificant. The Kazim estate occupied 2 acres of prime waterfront in Al Bateen, Abu Dhabi's most exclusive district. Security footage shows Lorena's wide eyes as the car passed through gates that reportedly cost more than what her mother would earn in 20 years of cleaning hotel rooms. The 40,000-square-foot mansion rose from manicured gardens like a modernist palace, all clean lines and reflective surfaces overlooking the Arabian Gulf. "The house was like nothing I'd ever seen," Lorena wrote in emails to Marina, recovered later during the investigation. "There are 7 fountains in the front garden alone. The garage holds 20 cars that are never driven. Meanwhile, my mother had to choose between buying rice or medicine last year." 3 generations of Kazims occupied separate wings of the sprawling compound. Kadir, the patriarch, maintained the central portion with his medical suite and private quarters. His son Faisal and daughter-in-law Layla occupied the east wing with their 3 children. And Kadir, Thamer's grandson and heir apparent to the business empire, maintained bachelor quarters in the west wing when not traveling for business. Lorena's introduction to her patient came hours after her arrival. Kadir Kazim's medical suite resembled a private hospital wing rather than a bedroom, monitoring equipment, hospital-grade bed, and technology that surpassed anything available in the Philippines. Kadir himself, though physically diminished by age and illness, emanated the unmistakable aura of someone accustomed to absolute authority. "Do you know who I am, Miss Cabral?" Security footage captured their first interaction. Kadir's voice weak but commanding. "Yes, sir. You're my patient. I am much more than that. I built this country's financial future. I advise rulers. I employ thousands." He studied her with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. "And now my life is in your hands." What Lorena didn't yet understand was her unusual position within the rigid hierarchy of the household staff. As Kadir's private nurse, she occupied a liminal space, neither family nor typical staff. She would take meals in her private quarters rather than the staff dining room. She would report directly to Kadir and his personal physician rather than the household manager who oversaw the other 47 employees. This unusual status created immediate tensions. Household records show complaints from senior staff about the special treatment afforded to the new nurse. Security footage captures subtle snubs in hallways, conversations that stopped when she entered rooms, and the thousand small ways that established power structures resist disruption. "The other staff barely spoke to me those first weeks," Lorena wrote to Marina. "I'm isolated here in ways I never expected. The wealth is suffocating. Everything feels like a test I'm constantly failing." What Lorena could not have known then was that she was being watched, evaluated, and judged not just on her nursing skills but on her potential usefulness in a complex family dynamic that prioritized dynasty over individual humanity. She was entering a world where people like her, foreign workers with limited resources and connections, were viewed as assets to be managed rather than humans with dreams and dignity. For those first weeks, Lorena focused entirely on establishing her care routine for Kadir. Her nursing notes, later recovered by investigators, show meticulous attention to his cardiac condition, respiratory function, and medication management. She quickly mastered the sophisticated monitoring equipment and developed rapport with Dr. Anwar, Kadir's primary physician who visited the estate 3 times weekly. But as days turned to weeks, the cultural isolation began wearing on her spirit. She was thousands of miles from everything familiar. The food, language, weather, and values all jarringly different from her life in Cebu. Video calls with her family provided brief comfort, but the 17-hour workdays left little energy for connection. "I'm doing this for them," she reminded herself each morning, looking at the family photo by her bedside. "Every day here means one less day my mother needs to clean hotel rooms." What Lorena didn't realize was that her dedication, intelligence, and compassion had caught the attention of someone else in the household. Someone whose interest would transform her professional opportunity into a deadly trap. Someone who saw in her not just a skilled nurse, but a potential solution to a very different kind of problem. Stay with us as we continue to unravel the events that led to that fateful 2:19 a.m. emergency call, and the jade bracelet that would become evidence in a murder investigation that shocked a nation. In our next episode, we'll explore the forbidden connection that developed within the mansion walls and the first steps down a path that would end in tragedy. If this investigation into power, wealth, and exploitation has captured your attention, don't forget to subscribe to Trace True Crimes for weekly deep dives into cases that expose the darkest corners of privilege. What really happened to Lorena Cabral? The truth is more shocking than you could imagine. By the time Lorena Cabral had been working at the Kazim estate for 3 weeks, the pattern of her days had settled into a rhythm as precise as the monitoring equipment that tracked Kadir Kazim's vital signs. Her nursing notes, later scrutinized by investigators, reveal not just medical observations, but the gradual evolution of a relationship that transcended the typical boundaries between caregiver and patient. "Mr. Kazim asked me about economic conditions in Southeast Asia today," she wrote in early April. "I felt embarrassed by my limited knowledge until I realized he wasn't testing me. He genuinely wanted my perspective. What began as professional conversations about medication schedules and treatment protocols gradually expanded into wide-ranging discussions about business ethics, cultural differences, and philosophical questions about purpose and legacy. For Thamer, confined to his medical suite while his empire continued without him, these conversations became intellectual lifelines to the world beyond his illness. Security footage shows their interactions evolving. Lorena initially standing respectfully at bedside, then gradually seated in the adjacent chair, medical charts forgotten as they engaged in conversation. Household staff later reported hearing laughter coming from Thamer's suite, a sound that had been absent since his health began declining 2 years earlier. My father seems different since the Filipino nurse arrived, Kadir Kazim remarked to his wife Layla, a conversation captured on the estate's comprehensive security system. He's engaging with his treatments instead of just enduring them. What outsiders couldn't see was the mutual respect developing between the billionaire and the nurse from Cebu. Thamer, despite his wealth and power, recognized in Lorena something he valued above all else: intelligence coupled with integrity. For her part, Lorena discovered that beneath the trappings of extreme privilege lived a man whose journey contained surprising parallels to her own. Born to modest merchants in pre-oil boom Abu Dhabi, Thamer had worked his way through Harvard Business School in the 1960s, returning to transform his family's small trading company into a global financial powerhouse. Like Lorena, he had been driven by family obligation and personal ambition in equal measure. My father believed education was the only inheritance that couldn't be stolen, he told her during a late-night conversation when pain kept him awake. I suspect your parents felt similarly. These moments of connection were captured in Lorena's private journal, later discovered in her quarters. Sometimes I forget who he is, the wealth, the power, and just see a patient, a person worried about his legacy and whether his life had meaning. Then I remember that his children have personal chefs while mine sometimes skip meals to save money, and the divide between our worlds feels insurmountable again. Yet Lorena's exceptional care was earning respect even from those initially skeptical of her position. Dr. Anwar, reviewing Thamer's improved vital signs, noted in medical records, patient shows remarkable progress under new care regimen. Nurse Cabral's attention to detail has identified medication interactions previously overlooked. By early May, Thamer had begun inviting Lorena to join family meetings about his medical care, a breach of typical protocol that raised eyebrows among other staff members but demonstrated his growing trust in her judgment. This unusual arrangement would create the circumstances for a meeting that would irrevocably alter the course of Lorena's life. If you're still with us, you won't want to miss what happened next. Be sure to subscribe to Trace True Crimes for more exclusive insights into cases that expose the dark underbelly of wealth and privilege. May 17, 2023, began like any other day at the Kazim estate. Security footage shows Lorena arriving at Thamer's suite at precisely 7 a.m., carrying her clinical bag and the morning medications. What made this day different was the scheduled monthly care review with Dr. Anwar and family members, a meeting where Thamer insisted Lorena should present her observations directly rather than having them filtered through the physician. It was during this meeting that Lorena first encountered Kadir Kazim. At 34, Kadir represented the perfect fusion of his grandfather's business acumen and modern global sensibilities. Harvard MBA, features that graced the cover of Emirates Business Monthly 3 times in recent years, reputation for progressive thinking in the traditionally conservative business community. Photographs from business events show a man comfortable in both Western suits and traditional dress, moving effortlessly between cultures with the confident ease that comes from believing the world exists to accommodate your ambitions. Security footage from Thamer's suite captured the moment Kadir entered, 15 minutes late for the meeting, offering apologies about an overseas video call that had run long. The camera angle shows Lorena's momentary glance up from her notes, then her quick return to professional focus. But even in that brief footage, investigators would later note the subtle shift in her posture, the almost imperceptible reaction to Kadir's presence. What the footage doesn't capture is the electric current that seemed to fill the room, at least according to Lorena's private journal entry that evening. Grandfather and grandson share the same eyes. Intelligent, assessing, missing nothing. But where Thamer's gaze has softened with age and illness, Kadir's feels like being seen by someone who immediately understands not just who you are, but who you could become. The meeting proceeded professionally. Lorena presented her observations about Thamer's improved cardiac function, decreased medication side effects, and enhanced quality of life indicators. Dr. Anwar confirmed her assessments with additional test results. Throughout her presentation, Kadir asked thoughtful questions that demonstrated both genuine concern for his grandfather and impressive medical knowledge for a non-professional. "You're clearly excellent at your job, Miss Cabral," he remarked as the meeting concluded. "My grandfather seems more engaged with life than he's been in months. Whatever you're doing, please continue." It was the kind of professional compliment that shouldn't have registered as anything special. Yet Lorena's journal entry that night reveals it had affected her more than she cared to admit. "He has a gift for making whoever he's speaking with feel like the only person in the room. It must be useful in business negotiations. I need to remember that everything in this house is ultimately about business." That warning to herself would prove prescient in ways she couldn't yet imagine. In the weeks following that initial meeting, household records and security footage reveal a pattern that initially seemed coincidental. Kadir, whose previous visits to his grandfather had been irregular and brief, began appearing almost daily, often timing his arrivals to coincide with Lorena's shifts rather than during the hours covered by the night nurse. "Shouldn't you be running the company instead of spending afternoons here?" Thamer asked during one such visit, the question captured on the suite's security system. "The company runs itself these days, grandfather," Kadir replied with the easy confidence of someone who had never experienced true obstacles. "Besides, I'm learning valuable things from your conversations with Nurse Cabral. She has perspectives we rarely hear in our usual circles." Staff interviews conducted during the investigation revealed how these interactions evolved. What began as Kadir observing Lorena's care routines and occasionally joining her discussions with Thamer gradually transformed into something more personal. Conversations extended beyond Thamer's care to include Lorena's background, her medical training, her family's circumstances. During Thamer's afternoon naps, security footage shows Kadir and Lorena retreating to the adjacent library, initially leaving the connecting door open, maintaining professional appearances, discussing medical literature or business publications. Over time, these discussions lengthened, the subject matter expanding beyond professional topics to personal interests. By June, their interactions had developed patterns that should have raised red flags for anyone paying attention. When Kadir traveled for business, he would call the medical suite ostensibly to check on his grandfather. But household phone records show these calls often extended long after Thamer had fallen asleep, with Lorena remaining on the line. The garden pavilion overlooking the Arabian Gulf became another meeting point, a location visible from the main house but offering the illusion of privacy. Security footage shows them meeting there during Lorena's brief breaks, initially maintaining professional distance, but gradually sitting closer, conversations becoming more animated, more personal, more dangerous. "He asked about my family today," Lorena wrote to Marina in an encrypted messaging app recovered during the investigation. "Not the polite questions employers ask. Real questions about my mother, my siblings, our dreams. I found myself telling him things I've never told anyone here." What Lorena didn't share with her friend was the growing emotional entanglement that both thrilled and terrified her. Cultural boundaries and class differences created a chasm between them that seemed impossible to bridge. Yet every interaction narrowed that gap in ways that made the impossible suddenly seem merely unlikely. The family's Ramadan celebration in June marked a turning point that several household staff would later reference in their statements. As a Christian outsider, Lorena had been invited to join the iftar dinner as a gesture of inclusion, a rare privilege for staff that highlighted her unusual position in the household hierarchy. Security footage from that evening shows her seated at the edge of the family gathering, modest in a simple blue dress, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "You look like you're planning an escape route," Kadir remarked, approaching her after the formal meal as family members conversed in groups around the courtyard. Their conversation, partially captured by security microphones, seemed innocuous on the surface: discussion of cultural differences in holiday celebrations, comparison of Filipino and Emirati traditions. But household staff noticed the private jokes, the shared glances, the way Kadir positioned himself between Lorena and the rest of the gathering, as if creating a private space within the public event. Most tellingly, he spoke to her in English rather than Arabic, effectively excluding others from their conversation. A subtle but significant choice in a culture where language often reinforces social boundaries. By July, security footage from various areas of the estate reveals a relationship rapidly moving beyond professional boundaries. Late-night conversations in the garden pavilion, lingering touches when medical equipment was exchanged, the gravitational pull that seemed to draw them into each other's orbits despite the professional pretense they maintained. "I know this is impossible," Lorena wrote in her journal in late July. "I know the cultural differences are insurmountable. I know his family would never accept someone like me. I know all the reasons this can never be anything real. So why can't I stop myself from hoping?" Meanwhile, household staff were beginning to notice. Whispers about the heir's interest in the Filipino nurse circulated below stairs. Some security footage from this period was later discovered to have been deleted, gaps that investigators found suspicious given the comprehensive surveillance throughout the estate. What remained, however, was damning enough. August security footage from the rarely used East Garden shows Kadir and Lorena in their first physically intimate moment. A kiss that crossed the line from possible misunderstanding to undeniable relationship. Her initial hesitation, then surrender. His confident assertion, as if even this boundary would naturally yield to his desires. "I feel like I'm living in two realities," Lorena confessed in messages to Marina. "In one, I'm a professional doing my job, supporting my family, building a future. In the other, I'm falling for someone I can never have, risking everything I've worked for, betraying my own common sense." Marina's response proved tragically prophetic. "Men like that don't marry women like us, Lorena. We're experiences for them, not potential wives. Please be careful with your heart." By September, the relationship had deepened beyond what either had anticipated. Security footage from various locations shows increasingly intimate encounters, always in seemingly private corners of the estate, always with the appearance of caution, yet still captured by the surveillance systems that Lorena didn't fully understand and Kadir perhaps assumed he controlled. Lorena's journal during this period reveals her growing emotional investment despite her rational understanding of the situation's impossibility. "When we're together, the differences between us seem to disappear. He tells me he's never met anyone who understands him like I do, that his world is full of people who want something from him, but I'm the only one who sees him as a person, not a position or a fortune. I want to believe him." What she couldn't have known was that Kadir's interest in her coincided with increasing pressure from his family regarding marriage and succession. Board meeting minutes from Kazim Global Investments in October 2023 include discussion of solidifying family alliances and succession planning implementation, corporate language masking the very personal expectations being placed on the heir apparent. The devastating complication arrived like a thunderbolt in early December. Medical records later examined by investigators show Lorena visiting the staff physician on December 4th, confirmation of pregnancy noted in her file. Security footage from that day shows her returning to her quarters, face expressionless in the way people look when processing life-altering news. Her journal entry that night consists of just 3 words: "What have I done?" For 3 days, Lorena attempted to contact Kadir privately, security footage showing her making calls from various locations around the estate. Call logs recovered during the investigation reveal messages left, texts sent, requests for urgent conversation. What they don't show is any response from Kadir, who had suddenly departed for urgent business meetings in London. Then came the announcement that would shatter any illusions Lorena might have maintained about her relationship with Kadir Kazim. On December 18th, at a lavish gala attended by Abu Dhabi's elite, Kadir's engagement to Samira Al Nasser was officially announced. Photos from the event, splashed across social media and business publications, show a radiant couple, Kadir in traditional formal wear, Samira elegant in designer couture, both heirs to financial dynasties whose merger would create the largest investment firm in the Middle East. Business analysts immediately recognized the strategic implications. The Al Nasser family controlled rival financial interests that had competed with Kazim enterprises for decades. This union represented not just a marriage but a consolidation of power that would reshape the region's financial landscape. Society coverage celebrated the perfect match. Both Harvard-educated, both from established families, both representing the modern face of Emirati business while maintaining traditional values. Emirates Today called it the merger of the decade, barely distinguishing between the business implications and the personal relationship. What none of the celebratory coverage mentioned was the Filipino nurse watching from the staff position at the periphery of the gala, assigned to monitor Thamer's health during the event. Security footage shows Lorena standing perfectly still as the announcement was made, her face professionally blank, one hand unconsciously moving to rest against her abdomen, where she carried the unacknowledged heir to the Kazim fortune. Later that night, cameras captured her in the garden pavilion, the jade bracelet from her mother reflecting moonlight as she made a phone call. Phone records would later show it was to Marina in Cebu. "I'm in trouble," she said, voice barely audible on the recording recovered during the investigation. "I'm carrying his child, and he just announced his engagement to someone else." Marina's voice crackled through the international connection. "Come home, Lorena. Whatever money you're making there isn't worth this." "I can't," Lorena replied after a long pause. "My family needs the money, and now there's someone else to consider." What Lorena couldn't have known that night was that her pregnancy wasn't just a personal complication. It was a threat to dynasties, to billions in business deals, to carefully constructed plans that had been in motion long before she arrived in Abu Dhabi. She had inadvertently become a problem that powerful people would solve by any means necessary. The morning after Kadir's engagement announcement dawned clear and cold by Abu Dhabi standards. Security footage from the Kazim estate shows Lorena, still wearing her uniform from the night shift, positioned outside Kadir's private office in the West Wing. Her face betrays no emotion, a professional mask perfected through years of nursing, but her hands nervously adjust the jade bracelet, turning it again and again around her wrist. For 37 minutes, she waits. Staff members pass, casting curious glances at the Filipino nurse so far from her usual domain. At 7:42 a.m., Kadir arrives, his expression shifting from surprise to wariness when he spots Lorena. The footage, recovered during Detective Nasser's investigation, shows him hesitating briefly before gesturing her inside and closing the door. What happened in that office remained private, one of the few locations in the estate without audio surveillance. But the security camera outside captured Lorena emerging 17 minutes later, her professional composure cracked, tears visible despite her attempts to hide them. Kadir appears in the doorway behind her, his expression unreadable as he watches her hurried departure. Later that day, a single line appears in Lorena's journal. He said, "This situation requires management. Not our baby. Not our future. A situation. Something to be managed." In that moment, Lorena Cabral ceased to be a person in Kadir's eyes and became a problem requiring solution, a threat to the carefully orchestrated merger of dynasties that her pregnancy jeopardized. What she couldn't have known was that the machinery to solve this situation had already been set in motion with the cold efficiency that had built the Kazim fortune. If the depths of human callousness fascinate you, hit that subscribe button because Trace True Crimes is just getting started with this shocking investigation that exposes how wealth and power can transform people into disposable assets. 3 days after that confrontation, a new player entered the deadly game being orchestrated around Lorena's future. Vahan Mehta, 42, chief investment officer at Kazim Global, arrived at the estate for what staff believed was a routine business meeting with Kadir. Security footage shows him entering through the main gate at precisely 10 a.m., his designer suit and confident stride projecting the image of success and capability that had become his professional signature. Born in Mumbai to academic parents, Vahan had built his reputation as a financial prodigy whose investment strategies had helped triple Kazim Global's portfolio value in under 7 years. Business publications regularly featured his analysis, and rival firms had repeatedly attempted to poach him with increasingly extravagant compensation packages. What those glowing profiles didn't mention, what only Kadir knew, was Vahan's carefully hidden weakness. Financial records obtained during the investigation revealed catastrophic gambling losses in Macau and Singapore, over $2.7 million in debt to private gaming establishments with connections to organizations not known for their patience or legal collection methods. Vahan's brilliance was matched only by his addiction, a former colleague later told investigators. He could predict market movements with uncanny accuracy, but couldn't walk away from a baccarat table while he still had credit. Phone records show multiple calls between Kadir and Vahan in the days following Lorena's pregnancy revelation, culminating in the December 22 meeting in the Garden Pavilion, the same location where Kadir and Lorena had once shared intimate conversations. Security footage shows the two men speaking intently, Vahan's expression shifting from confusion to understanding, then grim calculation as he repeatedly glances toward the medical wing where Lorena would be attending to Thamer. Less than an hour after Vahan's departure, Lorena received a message requesting her presence in Kadir's office after her shift. The security footage from that evening shows her approaching hesitantly, still wearing her nursing uniform, the jade bracelet visible on her wrist. This meeting, unlike the previous confrontation, had been prepared for documentation. Audio surveillance captured every word of what can only be described as a business transaction where human lives were the commodities being traded. "I believe I've found a solution that benefits everyone involved," Kadir began, his voice carrying the practiced smoothness of countless negotiations. "Vahan has agreed to marry you and claim the child as his own." The recording captures Lorena's shocked intake of breath, then silence as Kadir continued outlining what he termed a mutually beneficial arrangement, with the detached precision of a corporate merger presentation. "Vahan is respected, successful, and can provide for you and the child. You'll maintain your position caring for my grandfather, with an increased salary and additional benefits. Your family in Cebu will receive a substantial settlement. In fact, the first installment has already been transferred to your mother's account." At this revelation, Lorena's voice finally breaks the silence. "You sent money to my family without my knowledge or permission? Consider it a wedding gift," Kadir replied, the recording capturing his dismissive tone. "One that can be retracted if necessary." The threat, though veiled in corporate pleasantry, was unmistakable. Financial records confirm that 250,000 dirhams, approximately $68,000, had indeed been transferred to Imelda Cabral's account that morning, an amount that would transform her family's circumstances in the Philippines. The transfer documentation listed it as a retention bonus for Lorena's exceptional service, creating a paper trail that appeared legitimate while serving as perfect leverage. "This arrangement solves everyone's problems," Kadir continued. "Vahan's financial difficulties will be resolved. You maintain your position and reputation. Your family achieves financial security. The child has a respectable father and name, and my engagement proceeds without complication." What the recording captures next is the sound of Lorena's rising realization about her complete powerlessness in this situation. "And if I refuse this arrangement?" Kadir's response reveals the ruthless calculation behind his charm. "Then unfortunately, your position here would become untenable. Your work visa is tied to your employment. Pregnant, unemployed, visa revoked. I imagine returning to Cebu in that condition would create significant difficulties for you and your family." The pause that follows speaks volumes about the impossible choice being presented. Security footage shows Lorena's fingers unconsciously moving to her abdomen, then to the jade bracelet, as if seeking strength from the connection to her mother. "When would this marriage take place?" she finally asks, her voice barely audible on the recording. "As soon as possible. January 10th has been arranged." 3 words that reveal how thoroughly her agency had been stripped away. Has been arranged. Not is proposed or would work. The decision had already been made. Her participation was merely a formality in a transaction already concluded between men who viewed her as an asset to be managed rather than a human being with dignity and rights. When Lorena left that meeting, security footage shows her walking not to her quarters but to the Garden Pavilion, where she remained for hours despite the evening chill. Phone records show a call to her mother in Cebu, a conversation where she somehow found the strength to congratulate Imelda on the mysterious bonus that would finally allow her to retire from the cleaning job that had broken her body for 14 years. What that phone call couldn't capture was the silent calculation Lorena herself was making, weighing her own dignity against her family's welfare, her autonomy against her child's future, her truth against the elaborate fiction being constructed around her. The marriage took place on January 10, 2024, at the Abu Dhabi Civil Registry Office, a sterile government building where unions are legally recognized with administrative efficiency. Photographs taken for documentation show three people who look like performers in a bizarre play. Lorena in a simple blue dress, her expression completely blank. Vahan in a dark suit, his discomfort visible despite his attempt at dignified calm. And Kadir standing as witness, the satisfaction in his eyes betraying his relief at a problem efficiently solved. There was no celebration, no family present, no acknowledgement of what should have been a joyous occasion. The official who conducted the brief ceremony later told investigators that something felt wrong about the trio, but nothing in their paperwork gave him legal reason to question the union. The woman never smiled, he recalled. Most brides, regardless of circumstances, show some emotion. She looked absent, as if her mind was somewhere far away while her body went through required motions. Immediately following the ceremony, all three returned to the Kazim estate. Vahan to his separate apartment in the city, Lorena to her nursing duties, Kadir to business meetings that had been scheduled to provide an alibi for his absence that morning. Security footage shows them arriving through separate entrances, maintaining the fiction that nothing unusual had occurred. That evening, household staff noted subtle changes in how others interacted with Lorena. Her new status, no longer simply the Filipino nurse but now the wife of a Kazim global executive, created confusion in the rigid hierarchy that governed estate operations. Was she still staff? Was she now family adjacent? The uncertainty created a social limbo that further isolated her from potential allies. "Mrs. Mehta, your quarters are being relocated," the household manager informed her that evening, using her new married name with careful formality. "Mr. Kazim has arranged a more suitable apartment for your changed status." The more suitable apartment proved to be a self-contained suite in the rarely used guest wing, more spacious than her previous quarters but strategically isolated from both staff areas and family spaces. Security footage shows Lorena entering this new domain, looking around at the luxurious prison that perfectly symbolized her new position. Upgraded yet more controlled, improved yet more isolated. That night, her wedding night, security footage captured her sitting alone by the window, still fully dressed, the jade bracelet reflecting moonlight as she wrote in her journal. The entry, recovered during the investigation, reveals the depth of her understanding about the transaction that had just occurred. "Today I was traded like a commodity on the futures market. My body, my child, my future, all exchanged in a business arrangement between men who see me as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. I married a stranger to protect my family and give my child a name, while the man I thought cared for me watched with the satisfaction of an executive closing a difficult deal. I wonder if this is how my mother felt all those years, sacrificing her dignity cleaning hotel rooms so her children could eat. Is this the inevitable pattern of women like us? To be used by the powerful, to clean up their messes, to bear the consequences of their desires while they continue ascending to greater heights." The final line of that entry would later haunt investigators reviewing the case. "I cannot live like this forever. Something will have to change." Phone records show Vahan arrived at her door the following morning, knocking softly before being admitted. Security footage without audio shows their awkward conversation. Two strangers bound by a contract neither had freely chosen, attempting to establish parameters for their forced coexistence. At one point, Vahan reaches for her hand in what appears to be an attempt at connection. Lorena withdraws immediately, her body language unmistakable. He nods, accepting this boundary, before retrieving documents from his briefcase, financial arrangements, household agreements, the bureaucratic details of their arrangement. As he leaves, cameras capture his pause at the doorway, turning back to say something that causes Lorena's eyes to widen slightly. Though no audio exists from this interaction, investigators would later learn from Vahan's testimony that his parting words had been, "I'm sorry it had to be this way. I had no choice either." Two people trapped in an arrangement orchestrated by power neither could oppose, both understanding that their value was measured only in usefulness to those with true control. What neither yet realized was that their shared predicament would ultimately end in blood, scandal, and a jade bracelet becoming evidence in a murder investigation that would shock a nation. Stay with us as we continue unraveling the events that led to that 2:19 a.m. emergency call. In our next episode, we'll explore how the facade of normalcy began cracking and the desperate measures Lorena took when she discovered the final betrayal waiting in her future. For 6 weeks following the January wedding, a careful facade of normalcy descended over the Kazim estate. Security footage from this period shows Lorena continuing her precise care routines for Thamer, whose health had begun deteriorating more rapidly despite her efforts. Medical records note increased cardiac irregularities, declining respiratory function, and the subtle signs of a once powerful man gradually surrendering to time. Meanwhile, financial documents revealed that Vahan's gambling debts had been mysteriously resolved, payments totaling $2.7 million transferred from a Kazim subsidiary through 3 shell companies before reaching the gaming establishments in Macau and Singapore. The transactions, later flagged by investigators, had been expertly concealed beneath layers of legitimate business operations, invisible to anyone without specialized forensic accounting skills. Business media continued breathless coverage of the upcoming June wedding between Kadir Kazim and Samira Al Nasser. Emirates Business Monthly ran a feature titled Dynasty Merger, the union reshaping Gulf finance, complete with professionally styled photographs of the couple touring potential wedding venues, Samira's diamond engagement ring prominently displayed. The article quoted financial analysts estimating the combined family enterprises would control assets exceeding $17 billion after the merger. Both families represent the perfect balance between traditional values and modern business acumen, the article gushed. Their union promises to create not just a financial powerhouse, but a family legacy that will influence the region for generations. What those glossy photographs couldn't capture was the quiet drama unfolding behind the Kazim estate's imposing walls, where Lorena moved through her days with increasing isolation. Her pregnancy, though still not visibly obvious beneath her modest nursing uniforms, had been noted in medical records and whispered about among household staff. Her marriage to a Kazim executive had elevated her status while simultaneously removing her from the social circles she had tentatively established. She was nowhere, kitchen staff member Aisha later told investigators. Not part of the family, not part of the staff anymore. Just floating between worlds, speaking only when spoken to, eating alone in her quarters. Her eyes had changed, like someone who has realized too late the true cost of the bargain she made. Security footage from this period shows Vahan visiting the estate every few days, maintaining the appearance of a new husband checking on his pregnant wife. These visits followed a rehearsed pattern, brief conversations in semi-public spaces, occasional meals together in Lorena's quarters, careful maintenance of appearances for any observers. Phone records show regular calls between them, though the content of these conversations remained private. What neither Vahan nor Kadir realized was that their perfectly constructed arrangement was about to collapse under the weight of a truth accidentally revealed. On February 22, 2024, Lorena was returning from Thamer's suite when she overheard a conversation between household staff in the service corridor, a space they believed was private but which the estate's comprehensive surveillance system captured with perfect clarity. The security footage shows Lorena approaching the intersection of corridors, then stopping abruptly upon hearing voices. Her body language shifts instantly, freezing in place, then pressing against the wall to remain unseen. The audio recording captures fragments of conversation between Fatima, the household manager, and Hassan, Kadir's personal assistant, discussing arrangements already being made for after the baby's birth. Once the child is born, the nurse returns to Philippines with settlement. Hassan's voice states matter-of-factly, "Mr. Kadir has already arranged the documentation. Vahan will file for divorce citing irreconcilable differences and cultural incompatibility." Fatima's response reveals the final piece of the betrayal. And the child? Mrs. Layla has concerns about that arrangement. The child stays with Vahan, of course. Mrs. Kazim has already begun identifying suitable potential wives from appropriate families. Someone with the right background to raise a Kazim descendant, even if unofficially. The footage shows Lorena's hand moving to cover her mouth, stifling any sound that might reveal her presence. For 97 seconds, she remains motionless against the wall, eyes wide, processing the revelation that the arrangement she had accepted, however reluctantly, was itself a lie. Not just a forced marriage, but a temporary measure designed to manage her until the child could be separated from her permanently. Her journal entry that night reveals the devastating clarity this discovery brought. They were discussing my future, my baby's future, like it was a corporate restructuring. Assets to be divided, liabilities to be managed, inconvenient elements to be discarded once their usefulness ends. I was never meant to raise my child. I was only the vessel, meant to disappear after delivery. For 3 days, security footage shows Lorena maintaining her usual routines, administering medications, recording vital signs, engaging in limited conversations with Thamer and other household members. But beneath this appearance of normalcy, phone records and internet searches reveal her frantically researching options, legal rights, and potential allies. On February 25, 2024, Lorena took her first desperate action to protect herself and her unborn child. Security cameras at Citrus Cafe in downtown Abu Dhabi captured her meeting with Nadira Khalid, an investigative journalist with the Emirates Investigative Journal known for exposés on labor exploitation among foreign workers. The footage shows the women in intense conversation for 47 minutes, Lorena occasionally glancing around to check for observers, her hand frequently touching the jade bracelet as if drawing strength from it. What security cameras couldn't capture was the USB drive passed beneath the table, containing downloaded copies of security footage, recorded conversations, financial documents, and Lorena's detailed journal. Evidence that would expose not just her situation but potentially a pattern of similar arrangements involving other vulnerable workers. If anything happens to me, Lorena told Nadira according to the journalist's later statement, this information must become public, not just for me, but for everyone trapped in arrangements they never freely chose. That same afternoon, phone records show Lorena contacting the Philippine embassy, requesting an emergency appointment regarding her increasingly concerning situation. The call, made from a public phone booth rather than her personal device, lasted only 3 minutes but resulted in an appointment scheduled for February 28th, an appointment she would never attend. Security footage from the estate that evening shows Lorena returning to her quarters and spending hours organizing documents, downloading files, and preparing what investigators would later determine was an escape plan. Her internet searches included flight schedules to Manila, legal rights of pregnant women in transit, and emergency visa procedures. What Lorena didn't yet realize was that her desperate actions had already triggered the security systems designed to protect Kazim interests from precisely such threats. Within hours of her meeting with Nadira, the invisible machinery of wealth and influence began moving with terrifying efficiency. The first sign came the following morning when Nadira Khalid received notification of her immediate promotion to the journal's London bureau, a position she had never applied for, requiring her to relocate within 48 hours. Her company email account was immediately suspended for security protocol upgrades, cutting off access to any files she might have uploaded. Her personal devices experienced suspicious technical failures, requiring factory resets that erased all recently stored data. Meanwhile, Lorena received notification that her embassy appointment had been unfortunately canceled due to staffing issues and would need to be rescheduled at an unspecified future date. Calls to the embassy were met with polite but firm assertions that no earlier appointments were available, despite her expressions of urgency. Perhaps most chilling were the subtle changes Lorena began noticing in her daily environment. Security footage shows new staff members appearing in rotations near her quarters. Her internet access became intermittently unreliable, particularly when researching legal protections or communications with outside entities. Personal items in her room appeared subtly rearranged when she returned from shifts. "I am being watched more closely now," she wrote in a journal entry found hidden inside a medical textbook rather than in her regular journal. "They know I know. The pretense is evaporating, and with it, any illusion of safety I might have maintained." On February 26th, phone records show Lorena attempting to contact Nadira, only to be informed by the journal's receptionist that Ms. Khalid had accepted an exciting opportunity abroad and was no longer available. 3 subsequent calls to Nadira's personal number went straight to voicemail. That evening, security footage captures a moment that investigators would later identify as pivotal in Lorena's mental state. Standing by the window of her quarters, staring out at the lights of Abu Dhabi, she suddenly turns toward the corner of the room where a small security camera was partially concealed behind decorative molding. For several seconds, she stares directly into the lens, her expression transforming from fear to something harder, more resolved. What follows is perhaps the most haunting footage recovered during the investigation. Lorena seats herself directly facing the camera and begins speaking clearly and deliberately, as if providing testimony. Though the estate's surveillance system recorded no audio in private quarters, forensic lip-reading experts later reconstructed her statement. My name is Lorena Cabral. I am a nurse from Cebu City, Philippines. I am 34 years old and 14 weeks pregnant. I was coerced into a marriage with Vahan Mehta to conceal that the father of my child is Kadir Kazim, who is engaged to Samira Al Nasser. I have discovered their plan to take my baby after birth and send me back to the Philippines. She pauses, touching the jade bracelet before continuing. If anything happens to me, it's because I refuse to let them take my baby. I am not depressed. I am not suicidal. I am fighting for my child's future and my own dignity. The following morning, February 27th, marked Lorena's last recorded day of normal activities. Security footage shows her performing her duties with Thamer, whose condition had worsened overnight. Medical records note her precise documentation of his vital signs, medication administration, and increasing respiratory distress. In what would later seem tragically ironic, her final nursing notes include a detailed plan for emergency intervention should his condition deteriorate further. Throughout the day, cameras capture Lorena moving through the estate with the hyper-awareness of someone who knows they are being observed. Each interaction with staff members is carefully measured. Her conversation with Thamer during lunch shows her maintaining professional compassion despite the turmoil clearly visible in her eyes when she believes no one is watching. At 4:17 p.m., security footage shows Vahan arriving at the estate, his expression tense as he requests a private conversation with Lorena. They withdraw to the garden pavilion, the same location where Kadir had once met with her, where their relationship had evolved, and where the arrangement with Vahan had first been proposed. Though no audio exists from this conversation, body language analysts noted Vahan's agitation, frequent gesturing, and Lorena's increasingly defensive posture. After 23 minutes, Lorena rises abruptly from the bench and begins walking away. Vahan catches her arm, saying something that causes her to freeze momentarily before pulling free and returning to her quarters. This would be their last recorded interaction. That evening, Lorena made one final attempt to secure outside help. Phone records show a call made to an international human rights organization's hotline at 7:42 p.m. The call lasted only 4 minutes before abruptly disconnecting. When the organization attempted to call back, the number was already unreachable. By 9 p.m., Lorena had returned to Thamer's suite for her evening nursing duties. Security footage shows her methodically checking equipment, administering medications, and adjusting his positioning for comfort, all while surveillance cameras installed after her meeting with the journalist tracked her every movement. What no one could have predicted was that this ordinary evening would culminate in a 2:19 a.m. emergency call and a jade bracelet becoming evidence in a murder investigation that would expose the darkest secrets of one of Abu Dhabi's most powerful families. Stay with Trace True Crimes as we continue uncovering the events of that fatal night and the investigation that would reveal how wealth and power conspired to silence a nurse who simply wanted to protect her unborn child. In our next episode, we'll take you through the final confrontation and medical crisis that left Lorena fighting for 2 lives, while powerful forces moved to protect their interests at any cost. If this investigation into the price of ambition has captured your attention, don't forget to subscribe for weekly deep dives into cases that expose how the privileged few can manipulate the lives of the many. The truth about what happened in those pre-dawn hours will shock even our most seasoned viewers. February 27th had already stretched Lorena's nerves to breaking point with the cascading revelations of betrayal, the failed attempts to secure outside help, and the growing sense that invisible walls were closing around her. What happened in the late hours of that night would transform her desperate situation into a murder investigation that even Abu Dhabi's wealthiest family couldn't suppress. Security footage timestamped 11:42 p.m. shows Vahan Mehta entering Thamer's medical suite. His movements quick and agitated, tie loosened and jacket absent despite his usual meticulous appearance. Lorena is visible at Thamer's bedside, completing evening vitals checks. Her body language instantly stiffens at Vahan's entrance, one hand reflexively moving to protect her abdomen, a gesture that speaks volumes about her mental state. Though no audio was captured, security footage shows an increasingly heated exchange. Lip-reading experts later reconstructed fragments. Vahan demanding Lorena be reasonable and think about everyone involved, while she repeatedly shakes her head, backing away from his advancing figure. The elderly Thamer, though weakened, is clearly disturbed by the confrontation occurring in his private space, his monitoring equipment showing elevated heart rate and blood pressure. At 11:51 p.m., the situation escalates dramatically. Vahan grabs Lorena's arm as she attempts to move past him to adjust Thamer's oxygen flow. The footage shows her wrenching away, knocking over a medical tray. What happens next would become crucial evidence. Thamer, witnessing the physical confrontation, reaches for the medical alert button beside his bed with trembling fingers. Within 40 seconds, 2 security personnel arrive at the suite. The footage shows them finding Thamer visibly agitated, Lorena with her back against the medical cabinet, and Vahan attempting to project calm authority despite the chaos. After a brief exchange, Vahan exits with the security staff, but not before turning back to deliver what lip-reading experts identified as, "This isn't over. Think carefully about your next move." Left alone with Thamer, Lorena's professional training reasserts itself. Security footage shows her hands shaking as she administers his evening medications, checks monitoring equipment, and attempts to soothe the elderly man back to sleep. For nearly an hour, she remains at his bedside until his vital signs stabilize and he drifts into sleep. At 1:17 a.m., household logs show Lorena requesting her relief nurse to arrive early, claiming fatigue. Anisa Patel, the night nurse who had been scheduled for 2 a.m., arrives at 1:42 a.m. Security footage captures their brief handover, Lorena's exhaustion evident as she provides patient updates before departing for her quarters. What happens next remains the most contested timeline in the investigation. At 2:36 a.m., surveillance cameras capture Lorena returning to the medical storage room adjacent to Thamer's suite. Access logs show she used her credentials to enter, nothing unusual for a nurse potentially retrieving forgotten items or preparing for morning medications. The footage shows her removing several vials and placing them in her pocket before returning to her quarters. These actions would later be interpreted in dramatically different ways, the prosecution arguing they demonstrated premeditation for suicide, the defense countering they showed preparation for self-protection in a threatening situation. What is undisputed is that Lorena believed she was fighting for her life and her child's future. The next 43 minutes contain no security footage of Lorena. Her quarters, though equipped with surveillance cameras, experienced what system logs recorded as a temporary malfunction during this critical period. A coincidence investigators would find highly suspicious given the timing. At 2:19 a.m., external security cameras capture the arrival of a private ambulance at the estate's service entrance. Not the household's regular medical service, but a different company with no previous record of serving the Kazim family. 2 EMTs proceed directly to Lorena's quarters, bypassing standard security protocols with access codes they shouldn't have possessed. For minutes later, the same cameras record Lorena being transported on a stretcher, unconscious, an oxygen mask covering her face. The EMTs move with practiced efficiency but unusual haste, loading her into the ambulance without the standard stabilization procedures typically performed on-site. Most tellingly, notification to local authorities about the medical emergency wasn't filed until 4:27 a.m., more than an hour after Lorena had been transported from the estate and well outside normal reporting protocols for critical incidents. If you've been following this shocking case, hit that subscribe button now because we're just getting to the heart of a conspiracy that exposes how wealth and power can literally determine who lives and dies. Dr. Mariam Al-Hosani was nearing the end of her overnight shift at Zayed Medical Center when the private ambulance arrived. Her initial assessment, documented in hospital records later seized by investigators, noted immediate concerns about Lorena's condition. Patient presents unconscious with dangerously low respiratory rate and blood pressure. Her notes read, EMTs report possible suicide attempt but circumstances appear inconsistent with self-harm. Security personnel rather than family-accompanied transport. Toxicology results would later reveal a lethal combination of sedatives and hypnotics in Lorena's system, medications she would have had access to as a nurse, lending superficial credibility to the suicide narrative. But Dr. Al-Hosani's experience immediately flagged inconsistencies that would become central to the investigation. First, the pattern of bruising on Lorena's arms, neck, and abdomen was inconsistent with self-administration. Medical photographs document fingerprint-shaped contusions suggesting restraint during a struggle. Second, her broken fingernails and defensive wounds on her palms indicated physical resistance. Most significantly, the distribution of medications in her system suggested forced rather than voluntary ingestion. These medications weren't taken orally, Dr. Al-Hosani told Detective Nasser during her statement. The absorption pattern and concentration in tissues indicate injection, multiple injection sites, administered with varying levels of skill. Some precisely in major vessels, others haphazardly into muscle tissue. No one self-administers that way, especially not a trained medical professional. But the most alarming discovery came during emergency intervention. Ultrasound revealed placental abruption, separation of the placenta from the uterine wall, consistent with abdominal trauma. Medical notes document, fetal distress evident. Abruption pattern suggests recent physical impact to lower abdomen. Emergency surgery indicated to attempt saving mother and child. For 4 hours, the medical team fought to stabilize Lorena while addressing the life-threatening hemorrhage from the placental separation. Hospital security footage shows a grim procession of specialists rushing to the operating theater as her condition deteriorated despite intervention. At 7:42 a.m., Lorena Cabral was pronounced dead from multiple organ failure, resulting from hemorrhagic shock and medication toxicity. Her unborn child, estimated at 14 weeks gestation, did not survive. The only personal item accompanying her to the morgue was the jade bracelet, still circling her wrist, the final connection to a mother who had once believed it would protect her daughter far from home. Dr. Al-Hosani, troubled by the suspicious circumstances, personally contacted authorities rather than accepting the suicide narrative being promoted by the security personnel who had accompanied the ambulance. Her call reached Detective Aziza Nasser, who arrived at the hospital within the hour. At 42, Nasser had spent 15 years with Abu Dhabi's Special Victims Unit, specializing in crimes involving foreign workers in elite households. Colleagues described her as methodical, incorruptible, and stubbornly persistent, qualities that had made her simultaneously respected and resented within a system often pressured to accommodate powerful interests. From the moment I saw her lying in the morgue, I knew this wasn't suicide, Nasser later testified. Everything about the scene was wrong. The timing, the private ambulance, the delayed notification, the defensive wounds. This woman fought for her life, and someone made sure she lost that fight. Nasser's initial investigation moved with remarkable speed. Hospital security footage, medical records, and statements from attending staff were secured before interested parties could intervene. Preliminary toxicology was expedited rather than following standard protocols that might have allowed external pressure to influence results. By mid-morning, Nasser had assembled enough preliminary evidence to justify expanding the investigation to the Kazim estate. What she couldn't have anticipated was the reception awaiting her when she arrived to conduct initial interviews. Bihan Mehta was seated in the main reception room, his designer suit immaculate despite the early hour, eyes reddened in what appeared to be genuine distress. Accompanying him was not Kadir Kazim, whom Nasser had expected to encounter, but 4 attorneys from Fakhri and Associates, Abu Dhabi's most expensive and politically connected law firm. We understand this is a tragedy. The lead attorney began before Nasser could even introduce herself. Mr. Mehta is naturally devastated by his wife's suicide and wishes to cooperate fully while requesting the sensitivity this situation deserves. The word suicide was emphasized slightly, establishing the narrative they intended to maintain. Nasser, with 15 years of experience reading power dynamics, recognized the choreography of influence unfolding before her. The grieving husband, the protective lawyers, the preferred explanation already framed and ready for official adoption. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Mehta alone," she replied, her tone making it clear this wasn't a request. After a brief but tense standoff, the attorneys withdrew to an adjacent room, leaving Vahan and Nasser in carefully staged privacy that both recognized was almost certainly being monitored. Nasser's interview technique, renowned among colleagues for its effectiveness, began not with accusation but with space. Silence that suspects often felt compelled to fill with increasingly revealing statements. For nearly a minute, she simply studied Vahan, noting his reactions. The excessive blinking, the unconscious adjustment of his tie, the inability to maintain eye contact. "Tell me about your marriage," she finally said, her tone neutral but attentive. What followed was a carefully constructed narrative that Nasser immediately recognized as rehearsed. Vahan described meeting Lorena through their mutual connection to the Kazim family, a whirlwind romance despite cultural differences, and recent concerns about her emotional stability as pregnancy hormones affected her mental state. She became increasingly paranoid, he claimed, voice catching in what seemed like practiced emotion. Imagining conspiracies, believing people were watching her. "I tried to get her help, but she refused. Last night, I found her incoherent, accusing me of plotting against her. I left to give her space, never imagining she would." He trailed off, covering his face. Nasser allowed another stretch of silence before asking her next question. Why was a private ambulance called rather than emergency services? The momentary flash of surprise in Vahan's eyes confirmed what Nasser had suspected. He hadn't been briefed on this detail of the timeline. The household has a service we use for all medical situations. Standard protocol. This wasn't your usual service, Nasser countered, watching his reaction. Different company, different procedures, no prior relationship with the estate. Who authorized them? Vahan's hesitation was brief but telling. "I'm not sure about those details. Everything happened so quickly." As the interview continued, Nasser methodically identified inconsistencies in Vahan's account. His claim of finding Lorena incoherent, contradicted by his earlier statement that he had left to give her space. His insistence that they had a loving relationship despite staff reports of separate living arrangements. His assertion that he was devastated by her death while already having approved cremation arrangements before any investigation could be completed. Most significantly, his timeline of discovering Lorena unconscious conflicted with security footage showing him in a separate wing of the estate when the ambulance was called. When confronted with this discrepancy, Vahan claimed confusion due to emotional trauma, an explanation Nasser had heard from countless guilty suspects throughout her career. As the interview concluded, Nasser delivered the statement that would initiate one of Abu Dhabi's most controversial investigations. "Mr. Mehta, this is now officially a suspicious death inquiry. I'll need access to all security footage, communications, and staff for questioning. Nothing is to be deleted, destroyed, or removed from the premises." The look that crossed Vahan's face in that moment, panic briefly breaking through the mask of grief, confirmed what Nasser already suspected. She was not investigating a suicide, but a murder designed to eliminate a threat to powerful interests. As she left the reception room, Nasser passed the attorneys waiting impatiently in the hallway. Beyond them stood Kadir Kazim, his expression unreadable as he watched the detective who would soon unravel the conspiracy that had ended Lorena's life. What Nasser didn't yet know was that the jade bracelet still on Lorena's wrist in the morgue would become the symbol of a case that would expose not just a single murder, but a system that treated human lives as commodities to be acquired or discarded according to the needs of wealth and power. Stay with Trace True Crimes as we continue investigating the events that transformed a nurse from Cebu City into the center of Abu Dhabi's most shocking murder case. In our next episode, we'll reveal how the carefully constructed cover-up began to unravel, exposing patterns of exploitation that extended far beyond Lorena Cabral's tragic death. If this investigation has left you questioning everything about power and privilege, Don't forget to subscribe for weekly deep dives into cases that expose the darkest corners of wealth and influence. The truth about who really killed Lorena Cabral and why is even more disturbing than you might imagine. Detective Aziza Nasser had built her career following evidence rather than influence. As the autopsy results for Lorena Cabral arrived on her desk 48 hours after the death, each finding confirmed what she had suspected from the moment she saw the body. This was no suicide, but a carefully orchestrated murder. The toxicology profile is inconsistent with self-administration. Dr. Farid, the medical examiner, explained as they reviewed results together. Multiple injection sites with varying levels of expertise. Some administered with medical precision into major vessels, others haphazardly into muscle tissue, as if the victim was struggling during later injections. Most damning were the defensive wounds. Skin beneath Lorena's fingernails matching Vahan's DNA. Bruising patterns on her arms and neck consistent with restraint. Microscopic tears in shoulder muscles indicating her arms had been forcibly held behind her back. Someone held her down while someone else administered the injections, Nasser concluded, examining the photographs of injection sites. One person couldn't have managed this alone, especially with her fighting back. The most crucial breakthrough came from the Kazim estate's supposedly comprehensive security system. Despite initial claims that all footage was intact, forensic IT specialists discovered 17 minutes missing from the recordings, a gap carefully concealed by loop programming that made the system appear continuous unless specifically examined for timestamp inconsistencies. When recovered through advanced digital forensics, the deleted footage revealed what someone had desperately wanted hidden. Vahan Mehta returning to Lorena's quarters at 2:58 a.m., accompanied by two men wearing medical uniforms but moving with the practiced efficiency of security personnel rather than healthcare workers. The recovered footage showed Vahan departing alone 20 minutes later, straightening his jacket and making a phone call from the garden pavilion. A call that phone records would connect directly to the private ambulance service that arrived at 2:19 a.m. Most chilling was the final frame before Vahan exited Lorena's quarters. His glance toward the security camera, followed by a deliberate hand gesture to someone off-screen. This silent instruction would later be interpreted as the order to delete the very footage investigators were now viewing. If this investigation has kept you on the edge of your seat, hit subscribe now because we're about to reveal how a single USB drive broke open a conspiracy that extended far beyond one murder. On March 3, 2024, while Nasser's investigation was still building momentum against institutional resistance, a courier delivered a package to the Emirates Investigative Journal's main office. Inside was a USB drive, the same one Lorena had passed to Nadira Khalid during their cafe meeting, along with a handwritten note, "Publish everything. She deserves justice." The drive contained material more damning than even Nasser had uncovered. Recordings of conversations between Kadir and Vahan planning the management of Lorena's pregnancy. Financial transfer documentation showing how the Kazim family had leveraged control over Lorena through payments to her family. And most devastating, Lorena's video testimony recorded the day before her death, looking directly into the security camera as she detailed the forced marriage and plans to separate her from her child after birth. "I am not depressed. I am not suicidal," Lorena stated in the video, her calm determination belying her desperate circumstances. "If anything happens to me, it will be because I refused to surrender my child to their arrangements." Within hours, international media organizations picked up the story, bypassing the local controls that might have suppressed it. Headlines worldwide proclaimed variations of "Nurse's death exposes exploitation in wealthy Gulf family." Social media exploded with the hashtag Justice for Lorena as her video testimony was shared millions of times. Her calm recitation of calculated exploitation cutting through cultural and language barriers. 3 days later, Nadira Khalid published a detailed account from London, revealing how she had been forcibly relocated after meeting with Lorena and how she had secretly uploaded copies of the USB contents to encrypted cloud storage before her devices were compromised. Her article methodically connected the circumstances of Lorena's death to larger patterns of exploitation among foreign workers in wealthy households. As public pressure mounted, Nasser's investigation gained unexpected institutional support. Search warrants previously delayed suddenly received approval. Witnesses previously reluctant began providing statements. Most significantly, financial records from multiple Kazim enterprises became accessible, revealing patterns that transformed the investigation from a single murder into an exposé of systematic exploitation. "We found 7 cases with disturbing similarities," Nasser reported to her superiors in a briefing recorded for evidentiary purposes. Foreign workers becoming pregnant by family members, arranged marriages to business associates, then disappearances back to home countries post-birth. The children remained with the arranged husbands, who subsequently divorced and remarried women from socially acceptable backgrounds. In each case, the women had become unreachable after returning to their countries of origin. Their families invariably reported they had chosen to stay for better opportunities, while receiving substantial financial support from unidentified sources. This wasn't an isolated incident, Nasser concluded. This was an established system for managing inconvenient pregnancies while maintaining appearances and keeping the bloodline within acceptable social parameters. As the investigation expanded to include multiple families connected to the Kazims through business relationships, Abu Dhabi's carefully maintained image as a modern, progressive business center faced unprecedented scrutiny. International organizations began questioning labor practices throughout the region, with particular focus on the vulnerability of foreign healthcare workers. On March 17, 2024, Vahan Mehta was arrested for the murder of Lorena Cabral. The charges, first-degree murder, conspiracy, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice, carried potential death penalty implications under UAE law. His trial began 4 months later amid extraordinary security and media attention. The courthouse in downtown Abu Dhabi became the focal point for daily demonstrations by foreign worker advocacy groups, their signs bearing Lorena's image and the jade bracelet that had become the symbol of her case. Over 6 weeks of testimony, the prosecution methodically presented evidence of premeditation, conspiracy, and execution. Financial records demonstrated Vahan's gambling debts and their mysterious resolution coinciding with his agreement to the arranged marriage. Security footage showed his participation in monitoring Lorena's activities after she discovered the plan to take her child. Phone records documented the coordination between Vahan and others on the night of the murder. Most damaging was testimony from one of the men who had accompanied Vahan to Lorena's quarters that night, a security contractor who accepted a plea deal in exchange for his account of events. His statement, delivered in clinical detail, described Lorena's desperate struggle as they restrained her, her repeated pleas for her unborn child's life, and Vahan's cold instruction to finish it quickly before returning to the garden pavilion to make the call arranging removal of her body. Throughout the proceedings, one figure remained conspicuously absent from the witness stand: Kadir Kazim. Despite extensive evidence of his involvement in the arrangement that led to Lorena's death, his legal team, expanded to 12 attorneys from 3 international firms, successfully argued that no direct evidence linked him to the specific events of February 27. His statements, taken in carefully controlled depositions rather than open court testimony, portrayed him as disturbed by the tragic outcome of what he characterized as a private arrangement between Vahan and Lorena that I had minimal knowledge of. This carefully constructed distance, combined with the Kazim family's extensive connections throughout Abu Dhabi's legal and political establishments, effectively insulated him from formal charges despite public outrage. In business publications, the quiet cancellation of Kadir's engagement to Samira al-Nasser was attributed to strategic differences between the families regarding future business integration. Corporate language masking what insiders recognized as the al-Nasser family's swift distancing from the scandal. The merger that would have created the region's largest investment firm collapsed without public explanation, resulting in billions in lost value for Kazim enterprises. On September 28, 2024, Vahan Mehta was sentenced to 20 years in prison, a verdict that many considered lenient given the evidence, but one that reflected the complex power dynamics still influencing the case despite unprecedented public scrutiny. Within days, an appeal process began, funded by sources that financial journalists traced to shell companies connected to Kazim's subsidiary enterprises, a final attempt to manage a situation that had spiraled beyond the family's control. 3 months after Lorena's death, Thamer Kazim died peacefully in his sleep, his declining health finally claiming the patriarch who had witnessed but been unable to prevent the tragedy that unfolded in his household. His funeral attracted global business and political leaders, With Kadir prominently positioned as the grieving grandson and heir, his public image carefully reconstructed through strategic philanthropic announcements and media appearances that never mentioned Lorena Cabral. In Cebu City, the Cabral family received notice of a substantial settlement from anonymous sources, funds characterized as compensation for wrongful death without any admission of responsibility. Records obtained by investigators showed the amount at approximately $3.7 million, transferred through 7 intermediary accounts to obscure its origin. Imelda Cabral's response, captured in a statement to international media, revealed the dignity that her daughter had inherited. "This is blood money meant to purchase our silence. We reject it and demand justice instead. No amount can replace my daughter." Instead, the family established the Lorena Cabral Foundation for Filipino healthcare workers abroad, using funds raised through international donations. The foundation provided legal support, emergency resources, and advocacy for vulnerable workers in positions similar to Lorena's, those caught between family obligations and exploitative employment situations. In a ceremony that drew global media attention, Lorena's jade bracelet was formally returned to her family, who chose to donate it to the Migrant Workers' Rights Museum in Manila rather than keeping it as a private memento of tragedy. The simple piece of jewelry, with its engraved LC initials, became a powerful symbol appearing on posters, websites, and campaigns advocating for stronger protections for foreign workers in wealthy households. 1 year after Lorena's death, Detective Aziza Nasser delivered an assessment to an international human trafficking task force that captured the essence of the case that had transformed her career and challenged her faith in the justice system she served. "This was never about love or even lust," she told the assembled experts from 27 countries. "This was about power. The power to acquire what you want, discard what becomes inconvenient, and expect systems to protect rather than constrain your actions." She paused, displaying a photograph of the jade bracelet now exhibited behind glass in Manila. Lorena Cabral died because she refused to accept that her child could be separated from her through financial and social coercion. She died fighting a system that viewed her as a temporary vessel rather than a human being with rights and dignity. Despite the international attention and partial justice, the Kazim empire continues to thrive and expand under Kadir's leadership. Business publications regularly feature his visionary approach to regional investment and commitment to modernizing traditional business models. His personal fortune, estimated at $4.2 billion, grows annually despite the collapsed merger with the Al Nasser family. Yet in certain circles in Abu Dhabi, mention of a Filipino nurse named Lorena still creates uncomfortable silence. Her case, though legally resolved, remains an open wound in the consciousness of a society forced to confront questions about how wealth and power can corrupt even the most basic human connections. Today, visitors to the Migrant Workers' Rights Museum in Manila encounter the jade bracelet in a simple display case, illuminated to catch the green glint that once reflected moonlight in a garden pavilion where promises were made and broken. Beside it, a plaque bears words from Detective Nasser's final report. "Even the most carefully constructed facades can crack, revealing the darkness that wealth can hide but never completely erase." For every Lorena Cabral whose story reaches the light, advocacy organizations estimate dozens remain trapped in arrangements where their humanity is subordinated to their usefulness, where their bodies are commodities rather than temples, where their children become assets to be managed rather than lives to be nurtured. The jade bracelet with its simple LC initials stands as both memorial and warning, a reminder that beneath the gleaming surfaces of wealth and privilege, the darkness of exploitation continues to claim victims whose names we may never know. If this investigation has moved you to question the hidden costs of privilege and power, subscribe to Trace True Crimes for weekly deep dives into cases that expose how justice often struggles against the currents of influence. Share this video if you believe Lorena's story deserves to be heard beyond the algorithms that too often suppress uncomfortable truths about those with wealth and power. Remember, when wealth has no limits, neither does the capacity for justifying actions that treat human beings as disposable assets in a ledger of ambition. The next time you encounter a luxury brand, a gleaming skyscraper, or a financial empire built on vision and determination, ask yourself, what invisible sacrifices might be supporting that visible success? What human stories remain untold behind the carefully constructed narrative of merit and achievement? These are the questions that continue to drive our investigations at Trace True Crimes, and the reasons we believe that exposing darkness is the first step toward creating light.